I, Claudius wasn't the first time British television told the story of the Caesars, just the version that everyone remembers. Early in I, Claudius, where Augustus is already dying, the world feels old, settled, and quietly rotten. Power is established, the machinery of empire is already in motion, and from that point on, the series becomes less about the creation of Rome's imperial system and more about what it does to the people trapped inside it. That choice is part of what makes I, Claudius so effective. It drops you into a world that already exists and lets you watch it decay. But it also means something else. It means there's a whole stretch of Roman history, the formation of that system, the earlier emperors, the instability before it all settled into that familiar Claudian world that sits just outside the frame. And that is where the Caesars lives. The Caesars is, in many ways, the earlier version of the same idea. It covers much of the same historical ground, focuses on many of the same figures, and is built in the same studio-bound, dialogue-driven tradition of British television drama. But it approaches that material in a fundamentally different way. Where I, Claudius is a single continuous narrative anchored to one perspective, the Caesars is episodic. Each instalment focuses on a different ruler, a different moment, a different crisis. It is less concerned with building a single emotional through line and more interested in examining power as a series of case studies. And that difference, more than anything else, explains why one series is remembered and the other is not. On the surface, the similarities are obvious. Both series deal with the early Roman Empire. Both are studio dramas built around performance, language, and character rather than spectacle. Both rely heavily on political intrigue, personal relationships, and the tension between public authority and private vulnerability. You can watch an episode of The Caesars and immediately recognize the DNA that later appears in I, Claudius. But the structure is different. I, Claudius tells a story. It begins with Augustus and moves step by step through Tiberius, Caligula, and into Claudius himself. The events are linked. The characters evolve. The consequences of one episode carry into the next. You are always aware that you are moving forward, that history is unfolding in a continuous line. The Caesars does not do that. Instead, it presents a series of portraits, one emperor, one period, one problem at a time. There is continuity in a historical sense, but not in a dramatic one. Each episode stands more or less on its own. You are not following a single arc, you are observing a sequence of situations. This gives the Caesars a very different tone. It feels less like a drama you are meant to become emotionally invested in over time, and more like a set of examinations, almost like historical essays dramatized. And that makes it interesting, but it also makes it harder to hold on to. One of the key strengths of I, Claudius is its commitment to a single point of view. Everything is filtered directly or indirectly through Claudius. Even when he is not central to a scene, the narrative feels shaped around his understanding of events. That gives the series coherence. It gives it personality. It gives the audience someone to follow, someone to attach to, someone to return to. The Caesars does not offer that. Its focus shifts constantly. One episode may centre on Tiberius, another on Caligula, another on the broader machinery of imperial power. There is no single anchor. Instead of asking, who is this person and how do they survive this world? It asks, what happens when this kind of person holds power in this kind of system? That is a more analytical question, and it produces a different kind of drama. You are not invited to settle in. You are invited to observe. This difference in structure has a direct effect on how the two series are remembered. I, Claudius is easy to recall because it behaves like a story. You remember Augustus fading at the beginning, Tiberius's unease, Caligula's descent, Claudius's reluctant rise. The narrative builds, the performances accumulate, the series leaves an impression because it has a shape. The Caesars, by contrast, fragments in the memory. You may remember individual performances, you may remember specific episodes, but there is no single arc to carry it forward in your mind, no central character to unify the experience. So even if, episode for episode, it is doing something equally interesting, it does not leave the same kind of footprint. There is also the matter of when the two series were made. The Caesars arrives in 1968. British television drama at that point is still heavily rooted in theatrical traditions, studio-bound, performance-led, dialogue-heavy. There is very little attempt to disguise that artificiality of the setting. The focus is on language and acting rather than immersion. By the time I, Claudius appears in 1976, something has shifted. Not in a dramatic, technical sense. It is still a studio production, but in tone. There is more confidence, more willingness to lean into the material, more sense that television can sustain something longer, more complex, more psychologically layered. I, Claudius feels like a culmination of that approach. The Caesars feels like an earlier step toward it. It is tempting to say that I, Claudius is simply better, but that is not quite right. What it is, more precisely, is better aligned with how television holds an audience. It offers continuity, character attachment, cumulative storytelling. It gives viewers a reason to return week after week, not just to see what happens next in history, but to see what happens next to these people. The Caesars does not quite provide that. It offers insight rather than immersion, structure rather than momentum. It asks the audience to reset each time, to engage afresh with each episode. That is a harder ask. And yet, there is something valuable in what the Caesars does. By stepping away from a single narrative, it allows itself to examine power more directly, to look at different rulers, different decisions, different consequences, without being tied to a single emotional arc. It can be sharper, more focused, less constrained by the need to maintain a continuous story. In some ways, it is closer to history, not as a lived experience, but as a sequence of events and personalities, each with their own logic. Seen in that light, the Caesars become something quite specific, not a failed version of I, Claudius, not an inferior one, but a precursor, a series working through the same material, experimenting with how to present it, finding one set of answers where I, Claudius would later find another. It shows you the road not taken, or perhaps more accurately, the road taken first. If you come to the Caesars expecting I, Claudius, you will probably be disappointed. It does not offer the same narrative pull. It does not give you the same sense of progression. It does not build the same way. But if you come to it as something else, as an earlier attempt to grapple with the same history, using a different structure and a different set of priorities, it becomes much more interesting. It becomes a glimpse into how British television was learning to handle large, complex historical material. And it makes I, Claudius itself clearer, because you can see by contrast exactly what choices were made and why they worked. Not because the material changed, but because the way of telling it did. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that. I have opened my shop now, if anybody's interested. There's no obligation for anything. There's just some things in there that you may or may not be interested in. But I will be back on another day with another television show. Bye!